Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate all the work that you're doing. Stephen, by the way, is working on an amazing documentary on the late Bill Barilko, which I'm sure he'll talk about at some other time. Dear friends, colleagues, distinguished guests, my name is Paul Grod, and I'm the president of the Ukrainian World Congress, which is an umbrella organization for Ukrainian communities in over 80 countries around the world. And we're very proud that the Canada-Ukraine Chamber of Commerce is a member of the Ukrainian World Congress, and we are congratulating them for this amazing Rebuild Ukraine conference, and also for the work that they're doing around the world. And in particular, Zenon Petichny, the chair, the president, who is also vice president of the Ukrainian World Congress, and is working to help build similar chambers of commerce in other countries around the world. So this is a real great model for other countries, and I want to thank and congratulate your work. I would just make a quick plug about some of the work that the Ukrainian World Congress has been doing to help rebuild Ukraine, in particular in an area called Energize Ukraine. And there are two focus streams. One is around working with global companies, whether they're utilities or equipment manufacturers, to find surplus and have this equipment donated to Ukraine. And we work directly with Ukrenergo, the Ministry of Energy, and the government of Ukraine to help get that to Ukraine. So we're proud that companies like Electro, which is a utility here just north of Toronto, companies like Ontario Power Generation, Sask Power, Hydro-Quebec, and OPG have been one of the many donors who have donated, and we've been able to, through Energize Ukraine, get that equipment, which is hard to find because these are huge transformers, to Ukraine. The second area of focus with Energize Ukraine is around building microgrids. And we've been taking donations that has allowed us to build resilient communities. That is, microgrids with solar battery systems at hospitals and schools throughout Ukraine. So we're continuing to try to find donors to continue to do that, and we will continue to support Ukraine and ensure that Ukraine stays resilient. I have the honor here to introduce a good friend, Chrystia Freeland, who I've known before her life in politics, and look forward to working with her for many more years. Chrystia needs no introduction. As the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada and the Minister of Finance, Chrystia has led Canada through perhaps some of the most tumultuous and difficult times in our history successfully. She has, during that time, supported Ukraine in very, very meaningful ways. Many are public, many are not. The ones that are very public are, for example, the $500 million Ukraine sovereignty bond, which was guaranteed by the government of Canada, which provide Ukraine with low-cost financing, and other innovative things like working with her colleagues in the G7 and NATO countries to ensure that Ukraine was able to utilize the frozen assets, the proceeds from the frozen assets to help support Ukraine's economy. So Chrystia Freeland has really done amazing work in her time as Minister and Deputy Prime Minister. And we look forward today to hearing from Chrystia in her new role as the Special Envoy for Ukraine's rebuild. And I know Chrystia has just recently returned from Ukraine, straight from the airplane here. And Chrystia, I turn over the floor to you. Welcome and thank you.
Okay, дякую дуже, Pavle. Steve, thank you very much for moderating the show. Перше, я два слова скажу по-українськи. Я дуже сердечно хочу подякувати всім українцям, всім українок, що є тут, що приїхали до нас. Я знаю, що ви воюєте за себе, але ви так само воюєте за нас. Ви дійсно воюєте за весь демократичний світ. І я знаю, що приходиться зараз на міжнародній арені і раніше українцям приїжджати до нас і нам дякувати. Але я думаю, що правильніше це нам вам дякувати. То сердечно, сердечно вам дякую і низький вам поклін. Слава Україні і слава Канаді! On the thank yous, I do just want to single out two people who are here today who work for Canada in Ukraine. You've just seen in action our outstanding ambassador, Natalka Smoyts. And I had the chance to see her in action. I've seen her in action many times in Kyiv, but I saw her for a whole week. And, you know, the thing that makes you proud as a Canadian is when people from other countries talk to you about the high regard in which they hold our representatives. And I heard that so many times about Natalka. Дуже дякую, Natalka. And then we also have Jocelyn Kinnear, who runs the Ukraine team in Global Affairs. She was in Kyiv with us at the beginning of the week. Thank you very much, Jocelyn. Alors, je viens d'une visite de Kiev, comme Pavlo a dit. Je viens directement de l'aéroport. J'étais à Kiev pour 5 jours. Après ça, j'étais à Copenhagen, où j'ai eu une réunion avec Anders Fogh Rasmussen, l'ancien chef de l'OTAN. Et après ça, j'étais à Munich pour une retraite de Munich Security Conference. Une retraite où on a parlé avec plusieurs des gens de l'Allemagne, de le gouvernement, de Bundestag, plusieurs Européennes en général, et aussi beaucoup de représentants de l'OTAN étaient là. So I've been talking to a lot of people over the past week and a half, and I just wanted to talk briefly about 3 things. I want to talk about Ukraine. I want to talk about what I saw and heard from Western Europe about Ukraine. And then I want to talk about the business opportunity. About Ukraine, I think it's important for those of us who are not there to recognize 2 things at the same time. One is, people are really tired. It's almost 4 years of war, and it's exhausting. I didn't meet a single person who was not touched directly by the war in some way, who didn't have a husband, a brother, a fiancé, a son, a sister fighting in the war or wounded in the war or killed in the war. This is the everyday reality of Ukrainians, and of course, they're really exhausted. At the same time, what I was really struck by was the extent to which people were resilient and determined. I think you've heard that in the panels that we've had already. It was just so impressive to me that people would have missile strikes in the night, go down to the bomb shelters, and you know what they said to me is, you know, you go to the bomb shelters, but you wake up in the morning, you have a strong cup of coffee, and you go to work. And that is the attitude. I was only in Kyiv, but the stories that I heard from Kharkiv and Zaporizhia were in many ways even more impressive. Those are frontline cities. And this year, just this year, they are building 19 underground schools in Kharkiv, 30 underground schools in Zaporizhia. Think about what that says. What that says is people, families are determined to stay, and they're finding ways for their little children to go to school safely. To me, that is incredibly moving, and it says something about a determination to be there. A final thing I want to say about what was very striking for me about Ukraine is the Ukrainians I spoke to were determined to win the war, but they were equally determined to win the peace. Ukrainians, yes, are fighting for their sovereignty, but they're also fighting for their vision of a transformed Ukraine. A Ukraine which is democratic, a Ukraine which is a rule of law country, a Ukraine which is able to enjoy the kind of widely shared prosperity that we sometimes take for granted here in Canada. And I know that at this conference, and this was the case in Kyiv last week, there were, of course, conversations about the corruption investigations. From my perspective, those investigations are part of this conviction that Ukrainians have, that they're fighting Russia and they're fighting to win, and they are also fighting for the kind of Ukraine they're going to build at home. Corruption revelations are always challenging, but from my perspective, it's really important for us to recognize that this is not, it's not Steve Paikin's investigative reporting that has uncovered stuff. It's not an international financial institution, like the World Bank, that has gone in and said, oh my goodness. This is a Ukrainian institution working in Ukraine with the support of the people of Ukraine and of the Ukrainian parliament. And that, to me, speaks of a healthy society determined to become healthier. So, that's Ukraine. Second, just a few observations from conversations in Western Europe. I was very struck by the extent to which the Europeans who I spoke to recognize the stakes. There is a recognition that I had not seen previously of the very serious and ongoing threat that Vladimir Putin's revisionist Russia poses not only to Ukraine, but also to Europe, and indeed to the entire rules-based international order. We've seen European countries not only say that, right? There was Olaf Scholz's Zeitenwende, that the world has changed. We've seen Chancellor Merz talk about how we're not at war, but we're not at peace either. And we are seeing now historic investments in defense by the Europeans. And that is a measure of the seriousness with which they see this challenge. I would also say, in this panel that we just heard from, I think speaks to something that I heard from the Europeans I spoke to, which is an increasing recognition of the resilience and the strength of Ukraine. A recognition that Ukraine should be supported not only because it's the good thing to do and the right thing to do, which it is, but that Ukraine should be supported because a strong Ukraine can be a great ally for us all. A real recognition, we heard about the defense sector, an increasing recognition that Ukraine can be the arsenal for Europe, and that Ukraine can be the shield for Europe. And I think both of those things are true, and it's good to hear that recognized. Pavlo spoke about the assets of the Russian Central Bank. And all the Canadians here, we should be proud of the leading role our country has played on what I think is emerging as sort of the key issue at the moment. Canada was the first country to move on saying Russian assets broadly have to be frozen, and we need to be ready to confiscate those assets. And we worked hard at the G7 to move on making available some of those assets of the Russian Central Bank to Ukraine. There are a lot of conversations going on in Europe right now. There's going to be a decisive meeting in the middle of December, and that is going to be a real moment for Europe to show its willingness to be a real player and to be really there for Ukraine. Let's hope that Ukraine gets the support it needs to keep on being that shield and that arsenal. The final thing I want to talk about is the economic and business opportunity. I began my professional life as a journalist working in Ukraine, Russia, and what was still the Soviet Union. I watched and reported on the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I remember what a world-changing moment that was. It was transformative politically, but it was also this economic opportunity. And it was broadly understood that this was a moment of economic transformation, comparable maybe only to the Marshall Plan and Europe after the Second World War. Ukraine did some things with that opportunity. I think we shouldn't underestimate how hard it was simply to establish a sovereign state. But there were a lot of things that Ukraine didn't do. There are a lot of things in that transition that are not done. I think that we need to be thinking about Ukraine as right now being on the brink of, maybe even beginning to truly take advantage of that 1991 opportunity. I think this is a transformational moment for Ukraine. The society is already transformed. People, even in time of war, are transforming the economy. And as we move from fighting the war to fighting the peace, I think we really have to see this as an opportunity for an economic renaissance of the same scale and significance and depth that we saw after 1991 in parts of the world. You know, I crossed the border from Ukraine to Poland, and you can see how deep a transformation is possible. That is a transformation which is within Ukraine's grasp. And I really am so impressed by the resilience of Ukrainians, by the entrepreneurial approach that Ukrainians are taking to fighting this war, by just how smart and how competent they are. And they are doing that while fighting. Just imagine how incredible that economic renaissance can be when all of that energy that we have heard about here is unleashed and is directed to the rebuilding of Ukraine. And I'm not even sure, I'm not even sure rebuilding is exactly the right word, because I don't think, Ukraine needs to rebuild exactly what was there before the war. I think this is an opportunity for the transformation of Ukraine. And I think that is very exciting. I think that we know Ukrainians can do it. We know that they are doing the hard work to transform their society and their political economy to have a secure foundation for that transformation. And we in Canada, absolutely, our European partners recognize not only how important it is for Ukraine to succeed on the military battlefield, but how important and valuable it will be for Europe, for the democratic world, for Ukraine to become a prosperous Western democracy, securing that eastern flank. Really, for the first time in Ukraine's history, I think that is absolutely achievable. And I think we should also recognize, there is sometimes an advantage to starting from behind. And in business, in the economy, it can give a business, a community, a country, an opportunity to leapfrog and to use technologies, to use systems that are at the cutting edge. We see that in Ukraine already with something like GIA. The Ukrainian government has achieved a level of digitization which other countries, maybe including our own, can only aspire to. It's sometimes easier to build when you don't have legacy systems. And I think that is a final reason that this really is a moment of transformation for Ukraine. So to conclude, I just want to say thank you very much. Дякую дуже. Zenon absolutely insisted that I come back from Europe a day earlier than I had intended because this is such an important meeting, and I'm glad to have done so. If you leave with one thought, I would ask us all to leave here certainly committed to the idea that Ukraine needs to fight on the military battlefield, but also committed to the idea that Ukraine needs to fight and is fighting on the economic battlefield, and that is a battlefield that is not just about rebuilding, but is about transforming, is about a true renaissance, is about Ukraine being able to fully take advantage of those opportunities that first opened up in 1991. And the Ukraine that is already at an incredibly difficult time accomplishing that transformation is a country that, yeah, for sure, we need to help Ukraine. We should. It's in our own interests. But it is a country that will be a fantastic partner for us all, a fantastic investment for the businesses that have the courage to invest now, a fantastic shield, a fantastic arsenal, a fantastic business opportunity. Дуже вам дякую. My friend, a great Canadian, Jean Chrétien, had demonstrated Canadian courage and resilience by traveling to Ukraine in September. And he won the hearts of Ukrainians by saying, keep fighting. And also his wonderful slogan, Vive le Canada. Alors je vais dire, Vive le Canada, Vive l'Ukraine, Slava Ukraini, Slava Канаді. Дякую вам дуже.